starting very, very quietly. I feel like I'm kind of in a library, maybe. You're gonna have to adjust the sound of your headset or your speakers. I probably won't be talking much louder than this. Can you hear the rain? Is it a perfect level? I hope it's not too high. I've actually been looking forward to doing this for a while now. I'm really excited, and I hope I'm going to be able to give some ASMR tingles. Those are the best kind of tingles. Alright, I'll lower it just a scooch. It'll be more like a white noise in the background, maybe. Lament, lurk all you want. My goal today is to put you all in a very comfy, very relaxed mood. So you might want to get a sweater or a blanket and get comfy in your chair, or maybe lay down, whatever's the most comfortable. So, just so we know the rules of today. Hi. I'm going to be reading Arthas, Rise of the Lich King to you all. But I could be interrupted a little bit whenever anyone subs or resubs. I'm going to read out their name. So it might sound a little bit like this. Marcy just resubbed. ASMarSi. Marcy, thanks for the resub. If anyone tips 100 bits, I'll just be giving out an appreciation and praise. It might sound something like this. You did so good today. Today's been great, and you've worked really hard, and you killed it. You were amazing. Keep up the great work. And if anyone decides to tip 500 bits, it's going to be their choice. You can either type out what you'd like me to say. It can be practically anything, so long as it doesn't get me banned from Twitch. It could be a praise of your choice, or maybe just your favorite words. It could be pretty much anything. Mostly, I'm going to be trying to get my soft voice going. It's not whisper ASMR so much as soft voice. Some people like the whisper more. Some people like the soft voice. You could also ask me to swap if you want me to go quieter. I can try to whisper even more softly. Soft spoken is probably my favorite too. I hope that my mic will be sufficient for this. This is basically my first time trying. So you guys are kind of helping me pop my ASMR cherry today. Thank you for helping me with this. So make sure you guys are comfortable, alright? Like, the most important thing is that you're comfy. Make sure you have like your squishmallow like I do, or a pillow, or you're just really comfortable in your chair, just sink into your chair. Or if you decided to lie down, make sure you're lying down in a really comfortable position, maybe on your back. So, like I mentioned, you can interrupt me at any time. I'm going to read today World of Warcraft, Arthas, Rise of the Lich King. Prologue. The Dreaming. The wind shrieked like a child in pain. The herd of shovel tusk huddled together for warmth, their thick, shaggy coats protecting them from the worst of the storm. They formed a circle, with the calves shivering and bleeding in the center. Welcome, Zudi. Your caps, all caps message is kind of a little bit unexpected. Welcome to the ASMRC stream. We can chat in between my reading. Maybe I don't even have to read really, but it's there in case I need it. Are you guys all comfortable? Are you ready for me to read? Roko's comfy. I can tell. I think somebody's also comfy. Now, Zudi, I think you're the last one, because Lament is also very comfy. Get situated. Make sure you're comfortable. Grab your big sweater. All right, I'm going to continue. Exactly, Roko. This is going to rejuvenate us and give us the energy that we need to become complete and utter gaming freaks. We're going to know life. It's so hard, okay? We got to help each other out, though, because it's going to be tough. It's going to be a difficult journey just getting to 60, let alone getting the gear. So, we can do it if we help one another. It won't be so hard. I believe that we will get to 60 and at least kill a couple people during the preliminaries. guys ready for more story? Shall I continue? Alright. Their heads, each crowned with a massive antler, drooped toward the snow-covered earth, eyes shut against the whirling snow. Their own breath frosted their muzzles as they planted themselves and endured. In their various dens, the wolves and bears waited out the storms, one with the comfort of their pack, the other solitary and resigned. Whatever their hunger, nothing would drive them forth until after the kneeing wind had ceased its weeping and the blinding snow had sworn itself out. The wind roaring from the ocean to beat at the village of Kamanagua, tore at the hides that stretched over frames made of the bones of great sea creatures. When the storm passed, the Tuskar, whose home has been there for years, knew they would need to repair or replace nets and traps. Their dwellings, sturdy though they were always harmed when the storm descended. They had all gathered inside the large group dwelling that had been dug into the earth, lacing the flaps tight against the storm and lighting smoky oil lamps. Elder Atuik waited in stoic silence. He had seen many of these storms over the last 7 years. Long had he lived. The length and yellowness of his tusks and the wrinkles on his brown skin, testament to the fact. But these storms were more than storms, were more than natural. He glanced at the young ones, shivering, not with cold, not the Tuskar, but with fear. He dreams, one of them murmured, eyes bright, whiskers bristling. Silence, snapped Atuik, more gruffly than he had intended. The child, startled, fell silent, and once again the only sound was the aching sob of the snow and wind. It rose like the smoke, the deep bellowing noise, wordless but full of meaning, a chant carried by a dozen voices. The sounds of the drums and rattles of bones striking bone formed a fierce undercurrent to the wordless call. The worst of the wind's anger was deflected from the Tonka village by the circle of posts and hides, and the lodges, their curving roofs, arching over a large interior space in defiance of the hardships of this land, were strong. Over the sound of deep and ancient ritual, the wind's cry could still be heard. The dancer, a shaman by the name of Kamiku missed a step, and his hoof struck awkwardly. He recovered and continued. Focus. It was all about focus. It was how he harnessed the elements and wrung from them obedience. It was how his people survived in a land that was harsh and unforgiving. Sweat dampened and darkened his fur as he danced. His large brown eyes were closed in concentration, his hooves again finding their powerful rhythm. He tossed his head, short horns stabbing the air, tail twitching. Others danced beside him, their body heat and that of the fire burning brightly, despite the flakes and wind drifting down from the smoke hole in the roof, kept the lodge warm and comfortable. They all knew what was transpiring outside. They could not control these winds and snow as they could ordinary such things. No, this was his doing. But they could dance and feast and laugh in defiance of the onslaught. They were Tonka. They would endure. The world was blue and white and raging outside. But inside the great hall, the air was warm and still. A fireplace, tall enough for a man to stand in, was filled with thick logs, the crackling of their burning, the only noise. Over the ornately decorated mantel, carved with images of fantastical creatures, the giant antler of a shovel tusk was mounted. Carved dragon heads served as scones, holding torches with flames burning bright. Heavy beams supported the feast hall that could have housed dozens. The warm orange hue of the fires chasing away the shadows to hide on the corners. The cold stone of the floor was softened and warmed by thick pelts of polar bears, shovel tusk, and other creatures. A table, long and heavy, occupied most of the space in the room. It could have hosted 3 dozen easily. Only 3 figures sat at the table now. A man, an orc, and a boy. None of it was real, of course. The man who sat at the place of honor at the table, slightly elevated before the other 2 in a mammoth carved chair that was not quite a throne, understood this. He was dreaming. He had been dreaming for a long, long time. The hall, the shovel tusk trophies, the fire, the table, the orc, and the boy, all were simply a part of his dream. The orc on his left was elderly, but still powerful. The orange fire and torchlit flickering off the ghastly image he bore on his heavy-jawed face, that of a skull painted on. He had been a shaman, able to direct and wield vast powers, and even now, even just as a fragment of the man's imagination, he was intimidating. The boy was not. Once, he might have been a handsome child, with wide, sea-green eyes, fair features, and golden hair. But once was not now. The boy was sick. He was thin, so emaciated that his bones seemed to threaten to slice through the skin. The once bright eyes were dimmed and sunken, a thin film covering them. Pustules marked his skin, bursting and oozing forth a green fluid. Breathing seemed difficult, and the child's chest hitched in little panting gasps. The man thought he could almost see the labored thumping of a heart that should have faltered long ago, but persisted in continuing to beat. "He's still here," the orc said, stabbing a finger in the boy's direction. "He will not last," the man said. As if to confirm the words, the boy began to cough. Blood and mucus spattered the table in front of him, and he wiped a thin arm, clad in rotting finery, across his pale mouth. He drew breath to speak in a halting voice, the effort obviously taxing him. "You have not yet won him. I will prove it to you." Oh, Jesus. That is so inappropriate to happen during an ASMRC stream. I do apologize. How can I make that up to you? How about, because of that rude interruption, make sure you have liquids. Get your comfy sweater, okay? Get a comfy pillow and get situated, okay? I'm going to give you 3 minutes. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to get my sweater because I'm a little bit cold from the rain outside. All right? I'll be right back. All right. I have my comfy sweater. I appreciate the emojis in chat. It lets me know that you're still awake, but also that you're enjoying this. So please make sure they keep coming. It's good feedback to have. Unless you're so comfy, you can't even do the emojis. That's okay too. All right. everybody's ready, I'm going to continue. You are as foolish as you are stubborn, the orc growled. That battle was won long ago. The man's hands tightened on the chair as he listened to both of them. This had been a reoccurring dream over the last few years. He found it now more tiresome than entertaining. I grow weary of the struggle. Let us end this once and for all. The orc leered at the boy, his skull face grinning hideously. The boy coughed again, but did not quail from the orc's regard. Slowly, with dignity, he straightened, his milky eyes darting from the orc to the man. Yes, the orc said, this serves nothing. Soon it will be time to awaken. Awaken and move forward into this world once more. He turned to the man, his eyes gleaming. Walk again the path you have taken. The skull seemed to detach itself from his face, hovering above it like another entity, and the room changed with its movement. The carved scones that a moment before were simple wooden dragons undulated and rippled, coming to life, the torches in their mouths flaring and casting grotesque dancing shadows as they shook their heads. The wind screamed outside, and the door to the hall slammed open. Snow whirled about the three figures. The man spread his arms and let the freezing wind wrap about him like a cloak. The orc laughed, the skull floating over his face, issuing its own manic peals of mirth. Let me show you that your destiny lies with me, and you can only know true power through eliminating him. The boy, fragile and slight, had been knocked out of his chair by the violent gust of frigid air. Now he propped himself up with an effort, shaking, his breaths coming in small puffs as he struggled to climb back into his chair. He knew the man and threw him a look of hope, fear, and odd determination. Welcome, Nitro. Time to get comfy, all right? All is not lost, he whispered, and somehow, despite the orc and the skull's laughter, despite the shrieking of wind, the man heard him. Part 1. The Golden Boy. World of Warcraft. Arthas. Rise of the Lich King. Chapter 1. Hold her head. That's it, lad. The mare, her normally white coat, gray with sweat, rolled her eyes and whickered. Prince Arthas, Menethil, only son to the King Tyrannus Menethil II, one day to rule the king of Lord Aeron, held fast to the bridle and murmured soothingly. The horse jerked her head violently and almost took the 9-year-old with her. Whoa, Brightmane, Arthas said. Easy, girl. It'll be all right. Nothing to worry about. Joram Balnir grunted in amusement. Doubt you'd feel that way if something the size of this foal was coming out at you, lad. His son, Jerem, crouching beside his father and the prince, laughed, and so did Arthas, giggling uncontrollably, even as hot and soggy foam from Brightmane's champing mouth dropped onto his leg. One more push, girl, Balnir said, moving slowly along the horse's body to where the foal, encased in a shiny, shroud-like membrane, was halfway through its journey into the world. Arthas wasn't really supposed to be here, but when he had no lessons, he often sneaked away to the Balnir farmstead to admire the horses Balnir was known for breeding and to play with his friend, Jerem. Both youths were well aware that a horse breeder's son, even one whose animals were regularly brought as mounts for the royal household, was not a proper companion for the prince. Neither cared much, and thus far none of the adults had put a halt to their friendship. And so it was that he had been here, building forts, throwing snowballs, and playing guards and bandits with Jerem, when Joram had called to the boys to come watch the miracle of birth. The miracle of birth was actually pretty disgusting, Arthas thought. He hadn't realized there'd be so much goo involved. Brightmane grunted and heaved again. Her legs held stiff and straight out, and with a sloshy, wet sound, her baby entered the world. Her heavy head thumped down into Arthas's lap, and she closed her eyes for a moment. Her sides heaved as she caught her breath. The boy smiled, stroking the damp neck and thick, rough mane, and looked over to where Jerem and his father were attending the foal. It was chilly in the stables at this time of the year, and steam rose faintly from its warm, wet body. With a towel and dry hay, father and son rubbed off the last of the foal's unsettling, shroud-like covering, and Arthas felt his face stretching in a grin. Damp, gray, all long tangled legs and big eyes. The foal looked around, blinking in the dim lantern light. Those large brown eyes locked with Arthas's. You're beautiful, Arthas thought, his breath stopping for a moment, and realized that the much-touted miracle of birth really was pretty miraculous. Brightmane began to struggle to her feet. Arthas leaped to his own and pressed back against the wooden walls of the stable so the great animal could turn around without crushing him. Mother and newborn sniffed each other. Then Brightmane grunted and began to bathe her son with her long tongue. Lad, you're a bit worse for wear," said Joram. Arthas looked down at him, and his heart sank. He was covered in straw and horse spittle. Arthas shrugged. "Maybe I should jump into a snowbank on my way back to the palace," he offered, grinning. Sobering slightly, he said, "Don't worry, I'm 9 years old now. I'm no longer a baby. I can go where I—" There was a squawking of chickens and the sound of a man's booming voice, and Arthas's face fell. He squared his small shoulders, made an intense but ultimately ineffectual attempt at brushing off straw, and strode out the barn. "Sir Uther," he said in his best "I am the prince, and you had best remember it" voice. "These people have been kind to me. I pray you don't go trampling their poultry. Or their snapdragon beds," he thought, glancing over at the snow-covered piles of raised earth, where the beautiful blooming flowers that were Vara Balnir's pride and joy would burst forth in a few short months. He heard Joram and Jorim follow him out from the barn, but did not glance behind him. Instead, regarding the mounted knight fully clad in armor, Arthas gasped, "What's happened?" "I'll explain on the way," Uther said grimly. "I'll send someone back for your horse, Prince Arthas. Steadfast can travel faster even with two." He reached down, a large hand closing on Arthas's arm, and swung the boy up in front of him as if he weighed nothing at all. Vara had come out of her house at the sound of a horse approaching at full gallop. She was wiping her hands off on a towel and had a smudge of flour on her nose. Her blue eyes were wide, and she looked over at her husband worriedly. Uther nodded politely to her. "We'll discuss this later," Uther said. "Ma'am?" He touched his forehead with a mailed hand in courteous salute, then kicked his horse steadfast. Armored as his rider was, the beast leaped into action. Uther's arm was like a band of steel around Arthas's midsection. Fear bubbled up inside the boy, but he pushed it down, even as he pushed on Uther's arm. "I know how to ride," he said, his petulance covering up his worry. "Tell me, what's going on?" "A rider from South Shore has come," and gone. He brings ill news. A few days ago, hundreds of small boats filled with refugees from Stormwind landed on our shores, Uther said. He did not remove his arm. Arthas gave up that particular struggle and craned his neck, listening intently, his sea-green eyes wide and fastened on Uther's grim face. Stormwind has fallen. It's drinking time. One moment, please. I hope Drinking Face is still amusing for you, even now. Alright, how's it going so far? I hope you're enjoying this. What? Stormwind? How? To who? What? We'll find all that out shortly. The survivors, including Varian, are being led to Stormwind's one-time champion, Lord Anduin Lothar. He, Prince Varian, and others will be coming to the capital city in a few days. Lothar has warned us he bears alarming news. Obvious enough if something has destroyed Stormwind. I was sent to find you and bring you back. You've no business playing with common folk at this moment. Stunned, Arthas turned and faced toward him, his hands gripping Steadfast's mane. Stormwind. He'd never been there, but had heard tales of it. It was a mighty place, with great stone walls and beautiful buildings. It had been built with sturdiness in mind, to withstand the buffering of the fierce winds from which it had taken its name. To think that it had fallen, who or what could be strong enough to take such a city? How many people came with them, he asked, pitching his voice louder than he really wished to in order to be heard over the drumming of the horses' hooves as they headed back towards the city. Unknown. Not a small number, that much is certain. The messenger said it was everyone who had survived. Survived what? And Prince Varian? He'd heard of Varian all his life, of course, just as he knew all of the names of the neighboring kings, queens, princes, and princesses. Suddenly, his eyes widened. Uther had mentioned Varian, but not the prince's father, King Lane. Will soon become King Varian. King Lane fell with Stormwind. This news of a single tragedy hit Arthas harder somehow than he thought. 1,000 people suddenly rendered homeless. Arthas' own family was close-knit. He, his sister, Kalia, his mother, Queen Leanne, and of course, King Tyrannus. He'd seen how some rulers behaved with their families, and knew that his was remarkable in the degree of closeness. To have lost your city, your way of life, and your father? Poor Varian, he said, quick tears of sympathy coming to his eyes. Uther patted his shoulder awkwardly. "Aye," he said, "it is a dark day for the boy." Arthas shivered suddenly, and not from the cold of a bright winter's day. The beautiful afternoon, with its blue sky and softly curving snow, draped landscape, had suddenly darkened for him. A few days later, Arthas was standing up on the castle's ramparts, keeping Falric, one of the guards, company, and handing him a steaming hot mug of tea. Such a visit, like the ones Arthas paid to the Balnir family and the castle's culinary maids and valets and blacksmiths, and indeed nearly every underling on the royal guards grounds, was not unusual. Tyrrhenus always sighed, but Arthas knew that no one was ever punished for speaking with him, and indeed he sometimes wondered if his father secretly approved. Falric smiled gratefully and bowed deeply in genuine respect, pulling off his gauntlets so the mug would warm his cold hands. Snow threatened, and the sky was a pale gray, but thus far the weather was clear. Arthas leaned against the wall, resting his chin on his folded arms. He looked out over the rolling white hills of Tersfall, down the road that led through Silver Pine Forest, the south shore. The road, along with Anduin Lothar, the mage Khadgar, and Prince Varian, would be traveling. "Any sign of them?" "Nay, your highness," Falric answered, sipping the hot beverage. "It could be today, tomorrow, or the day after. If you're hoping to catch a glimpse, sir, you may be waiting a while." Arthas shot him a grin, his eyes crinkling with mirth. "Better than lessons," he said. "Well, sir, you'd know that better than I would," Falric said diplomatically, clearing, fighting the impulse to grin back. While the guard finished the tea, Arthas sighed and looked back down the road as he had a dozen times before. This had been exciting at first, but now he was becoming bored. He wanted to go back and find out how bright Maine's Full was, and began wondering how difficult it would be to slip away for a few hours and not be missed. Falric was right. Lothar and Varian might still be a few days away, if... Arthas blinked. He slowly lifted his chin from his hands and narrowed his eyes. "They're coming," he cried, pointing. Falric was at his side immediately, mug forgotten. He nodded. "Sharp eyes, Prince Arthas. Marwyn," he called. Another soldier snapped to attention. "Go tell the king that Lothar and Varian are on their way. They should be here within the hour." "Aye, Captain," the younger man said, saluting. "I'll do it. I'll go." said Arthas, already moving as he spoke. Marwyn hesitated, glancing back at his superior officer, but Arthas was determined to beat him. He raced down the steps, slipping on the ice and having to jump the rest of the way, and ran through the courtyard, skidding to a halt as he approached the throne room and barely remembering to compose himself. Today was when Tyrannus met with representatives of the populace to listen to their concerns and to do what he could to assist them. Arthas flipped back the hood of his beautifully embroidered red rune cloth cape. He took a deep breath, letting it escape his lips as soft mist, and nodded as he approached the 2 guards, who saluted sharply and turned to push open the doors to him. The throne room was significantly warmer than the outside courtyard, even though it was a large chamber formed of marble and stone with a high domed ceiling. Even on overcast days, such as this one, the octagonal window at the apex of the dome let in plenty of natural light. Torches in their scones burned steadily on the walls, adding both warmth and an orange tint to the room. An intricate design of circles enclosing the Sea of Lord Aeron graced the floor, hidden now by the gathering of people respectfully waiting their turn to address their liege. Seated in the jeweled throne on a Tyriad dais was King Tyrannus II. His fair hair was touched with gray only at the temples, and his face was slightly lined, with more smile lines than the creased frowns that etched their marks on souls as well as visages. He wore a beautifully tailored robe in hues of blue and purple, wrought with gleaming gold, embroidery that caught the torchlight and glinted off his crown. Tyrannus leaned forward slightly, engrossed in what the man who stood before him, a lesser noble, whose name Arthas couldn't recall at the moment, was saying. His eyes, blue-green and intent, were focused on the man. For a moment, knowing whose coming he was about to announce, Arthas simply stood looking at his father. He, like Varian, was the son of a king, a prince of the blood. But Varian had no father, not anymore, and Arthas felt a lump rise in his throat at the thought of seeing that throne empty, of hearing the ancient song of coronation sung for him. By the light, please let the day be long, long time away. Perhaps, feeling the intensity of his son's gaze, Tyrannus glanced over at the door. His eyes crinkled in a smile for a moment, and returned his attention to the petitioner. Arthas cleared his throat and stepped forward. Pardon the interruption. Father, they're coming. I saw them. They should be here within the hour. Tyrannus sobered slightly. He knew who they were. He nodded. Thank you, my son. Those assembled looked at one another. Most of them, too, knew who they were and they moved as if to end the meeting. Tyrannus held up a hand. Nay, the weather holds, and the road is clear. They will arrive when they do, and not a moment before. Until then, let us continue. He smiled ruefully. I have a feeling that once they come, audience such as this will need to be tabled. Let us finish as much as business that we can before that moment. Arthas looked at his father with pride. This is why people loved Tyrannus so much, and why the king usually turned a blind eye to his sons adventuring among the common folk. Tyrannus cared deeply about the people he ruled, and had instilled that sentiment to his son. Shall I ride out to meet them, father? Tyrannus scrutinized his son for a moment, then shook his fair head. No, I think it best if you do not attend this meeting. Arthas felt like he'd been struck. Not attend? He was 9 years old. Something very bad had happened to an important ally, and a boy not much older than he had been rendered fatherless by it. He felt a sudden flash of anger. Why did his father insist on sheltering him so? Why was he not allowed to attend important meetings? He bit back the retort that would have sprung his lips had he been alone with Tyrannus. It would not do to argue with his father here, in front of all of these people, even if he was totally and completely in the right on this. He took a deep breath, bowed, and left. An hour later, Arthas Menethil was safely ensconced in one of the many balconies that overlooked the throne room. He grinned to himself. He was still small enough to hide under the seats if anyone poked their nose in for a quick peruse. He fidgeted slightly. Another year or two, and he wouldn't be able to do this. But in a year or two, surely, Father will understand that I deserve to be present at such events, and I won't have to hide. The thought pleased him. He rolled up his cloak and used it as a pillow while he waited. The room was warm from braziers, torches, and the heat of many bodies in a small space. The heat and the soothing murmurs of voices in normal discussion lulled him, and he almost fell asleep. Your Majesty, the voice was powerful, resonant, and strong, jerked Arthas awake. I am Manduin Lothar, a knight of Stormwind. They were here, Lord Anduin Lothar, the one-time champion of Stormwind. Oh, thank you, Nitro. You did so well today, Nitro. I hope that you feel good, because you did so good today. Your evening's going to be fantastic, because you deserve it. Arthas edged out from under the seat and rose carefully, making sure he was hidden behind the blue curtain that draped the box, and peeked out. Lothar looked every inch the warrior. Arthas, though, as he regarded the man. Tall, powerfully built, he wore heavy armor with an ease that indicated he was well accustomed to its weight. Although his upper lip and jaw sported a thick mustache and a short beard, his head was almost bald. What hair he had left had been tied back in a small ponytail. Beside him stood an old man in violet robes. Arthas's gaze fell on the boy, who could only be Prince Varian Rin. Tall, slender, yet but with broad shoulders that promised the slim frame would one day fill out. He looked pale and exhausted. Arthas winced as he regarded the youth, a few years older than he, looking lost, alone, and frightened. When addressed, Varian recovered and gave the polite, requisite replies. Tyrannus was an old hand at knowing how to make people feel comfortable. Quickly, he dismissed all but a few courtiers and guards, and rose from his throne to greet the visitors. "Please, be seated," he said, choosing not to sit in the glorious throne, as was his right, but instead perching on the top stairs of the dais. He drew Varian down beside him with a fatherly gesture. Arthas smiled. Hidden away, the young prince of Lord Aeron watched and listened closely. Sorry, drinking time. More drinking. The men gathered spoke of creatures called orcs that somehow... Oops, sorry about that. Okay, I think I have them all turned off now. So sorry. It was Final Fantasy. Okay, where was I? Much apologies. Scuffed ASMR stream is scuffed. Hi. Hi. Okay. Let's continue the story, shall we? The men gathered spoke of creatures called orcs that had somehow infested Azeroth. Huge, green, with tusks for teeth, and lusting for blood. They had formed a horde that flowed like a seemingly unstoppable tide, enough to cover the land from shore to shore, Lothar said directly. It was these monsters that had attacked Stormwind and made refugees, or corpses, Arthas realized, as if of its denizens. Things got heated when some courtier or other clearly didn't believe Lothar. Lothar's temper rose, but Tyrannus diffused the situation and brought the meeting to a close. "I will summon my neighboring kings," he said. "These events concern us all. Your Majesty, I offer you my home and my protection as long as you shall need it." Arthas smiled. Varian was going to stay here, in the palace, with him. It would be nice to have another noble boy to play with. He got along well with Kalia, who was 2 years his elder. But, well, she was a girl, and while he was fond of Jerim, he knew that their opportunities to play together were perforce limited. Varian, however, was a prince of the blood, just like Arthas, and they could spar together, ride together, and go exploring. "You're telling us to prepare for war." His father's voice cut in on his thoughts with brutal efficiency, and Arthas' mood grew somber again. "Yes," Otha replied. "A war for the very survival of our race." Arthas swallowed hard, then left the viewing box as silently as he had come. As Arthas had expected, a short time later, Prince Varian was shown into the guests' quarters. Tyrrhenus himself accompanied the boy, resting a hand gently on the youth's shoulder. If he was surprised to see his son waiting in the guest quarters, he did not show it. "Arthas, this is Prince Varian Rin, future king of Stormwind." Arthas bowed to his equal. "Your Highness," he said formally, "I bid you welcome to Lord Aeron. I only wish the circumstances were happier." Varian turned to bow gracefully. "As I told King Tyrrhenus, I am grateful for your support and friendship during these difficult times." His voice was stiff, strained, weary. Arthas took in the cape, tunic, and breeches, made of rune cloth and mage weave and beautifully embroidered. It looked as though Varian had been wearing them for half his life, so dirty were they. His face had clearly been scrubbed, but there were traces of dirt at his temples and behind his nails. "I'll send up some servants shortly with some food and towels, hot water, and a tub, so that you may refresh yourself, Prince Varian." Tyrrhenus continued to use the boy's title. That would wear off with time, but Arthas understood why the king emphasized it now. Varian needed to keep hearing that he was still respected, still royal. When he had lost absolutely everything but his life. Varian pressed his lips together and nodded. "Thank you," he managed. "Arthas, I leave him in your care." Tyrrhenus squeezed Varian's shoulder reassuringly, then departed, closing the door. The two boys stared at each other. Arthas's mind was a total blank. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Arthas blurted, "I'm sorry about your father." Varian winced and turned away, walking toward the huge windows that overlooked Lordmere Lake. The snow had been threatening all morning, was finally coming, drifting softly downward to cover the land with a silent blanket. It was too bad. On a clear day, you could see all the way to Fenris Keep. "Thank you." "I'm sure he died fighting nobly and gave as good as he got." "He was assassinated." Varian's voice was blunt and emotionless. Arthas whirled to look at him, shocked. His features, in profile to Arthas now and lit by the cold light of a winter's day, were unnaturally composed. Only his eyes, bloodshot and brown, and filled with pain, seemed alive. The trusted friend managed to get him to speak with her alone. Then she killed him, stabbed him right in the heart. Arthas stared. Death in glorious battle was difficult enough to handle. But this, impulsively, he placed a hand on the other prince's arm. I saw a foal being born yesterday, he said. It sounded inane, but it was the first thing that sprang to his mind, and he spoke earnestly. When the weather lets up, I'll take you to see him. He's the most amazing thing. Varian turned toward him and gazed at him for a long moment. Emotions flitted across his face. Offense, disbelief, gratitude, yearning, understanding. Suddenly, the brown eyes filled with tears, and Varian looked away. He folded his arms and hunched in on himself, his shoulders shaking with sobs as he did his best to muffle. They came out anyway, harsh, racking sounds of mourning for his father, a kingdom, a way of life that he probably hadn't been able to grieve until this precise minute. Arthas squeezed his arm and felt it rigid as stone beneath his fingers. I hate winter, Varian sobbed, and the depth of the hurt conveyed by those 3 simple words, a seeming non sequitur, humbled Arthas. Unable to watch such raw pain, yet powerless to do anything about it, he dropped his hand, turned away, and stared out the window. Outside, the snow continued to fall. End of chapter 1. It's drinking time. We'll have a slight intermission. How are you guys enjoying this so far? Give me a sign. Oh, look, do you see that? That's gonna be my new body. Oh, thank you, Lament. 10 out of 10. Yay. Thank you, Roko. Roko, you worked so hard today, and it shows. You did so well. I'm so proud of you. Today's fantastic because you got up and you did your shit. You took care of everything that needed to be taken care of. Now you get to relax. Oh, I'm so glad you guys are comfy. That's the main goal here. Comfiness. I don't know if you saw it, but when you did the resub, or was it cheers? I don't know which one it was. The cheers. That's the new body that's coming. That's version 3.0. I know there's a lot of versions of me, but that's the beauty of being a pixel person. You can go through identity crises every day if you want to. I hope it does help you sleep, Nitro. Yes, Roko. It's version 2.0 and version 3.0 are going to be done soon. 3.0 is my robot body, which you'll be able to see in the alert boxes when it's triggered. And 2.0 is the one with the cute nose and the purple hair. So, soon, TM. Alright. Shall we continue? You guys want chapter 2? Alright. Oh, Nitro, thank you. Nitro, you're such a good person. You did so well today. Words cannot express how happy it makes me to see you do so well. You kicked ass today. Keep being you, Nitro, because you rock. Alright, chapter 2. Arthas was frustrated. He thought, when word had come about the orcs, that he'd finally begin serious training, perhaps alongside his new best friend, Varian. Instead, exactly the opposite happened. The war against the Horde resulted in everyone who could swing a sword joining the armed forces, right down to the master blacksmith. Varian took pity on his younger counterpart and did what he could for a while, until at last he sighed and looked sympathetically at Arthas. Arthas, I don't want to sound mean, but I'm terrible. Varian grimaced. The two were in the armory hall, sparring with helms, leather chest pieces, and wooden training swords. Varian went to the rack and hung up the training sword, removing his helm as he spoke. I'm just surprised, because you're athletic and fast. Arthas sulked. He knew Varian well enough to know that the older prince was trying to soften the blow. He followed sullenly, hanging up his own sword and unfastening his protective gear. In Stormwind, we start training when we're quite young. By the time I was your age, I had my own set of armor specifically designed for me. Don't rub it in, Arthas grumbled. Sorry. Varian grinned at him, and Arthas reluctantly gave a small smile back. Although their first meeting had been laced with grief and awkwardness, Arthas had discovered that Varian had a strong spirit and a generally optimistic outlook. I just wonder why your father didn't do the same for you. Arthas knew. He's trying to protect me. Varian sobered as he hung up his leather chest piece. My father tried to protect me too. Didn't work. The realities of life have a way of intruding. He looked at Arthas. I'm training to fight. I'm not trained to teach fighting. I might hurt you. Arthas flushed. No suggestion that Arthas might hurt him. Varian seemed to see that he was only digging himself deeper into a hole with the younger boy and clapped him on the shoulder. Tell you what, when the war's over and a proper trainer can be spared again, I'll come with you to talk to King Tyrannus. I'm sure you'll be handing me an ear in no time. The war eventually did end, and the alliance was triumphant. The leader of the Horde, the once mighty Orgrim Doomhammer, had been brought back to the capital city in chains. It had made a big impression on both Arthas and Varian. To see the powerful orc paraded through Lord Aeron, to rally on the young paladin lieutenant who had defeated Doomhammer after the orc had slain the noble Anduin Lothar, had shown mercy in choosing to spare the beast. Tyrannus, who was a kindly man, continued in that fashion by forbidding attacks on the creature. Jeers, boos, yes, seeing the orc who had terrorized them for so long now powerless, an object of scorn and derision, heartened morale. But Orgarg Doomhammer would not be harmed while in his care. It was the only time Arthas had seen Varian's face ugly with hate, and he supposed he could not blame the other boy. If orcs had murdered Tyrannus and Uther, he supposed he'd want to spit on the ugly green things too. He should be killed, Varian growled, his eyes angry as they watched from the parapets as Doomhammer was marched toward the palace. And I wish I could be the one to do it. He's going to the Undercity, said Arthas. The ancient royal crypts, dungeons, sewers, and twining alleys deep below the palace had somehow gotten that nickname, as if the palace was simply another destination, dark, dank, filthy. The Undercity was intended only for prisoners or the dead. But the poorest of the poor in the land somehow always seemed to find their way in. If one was homeless, it was better than freezing in the elements. And if one needed something not entirely legal, even Arthas understood that that was where you went to get it. Now and then, the guards would go down and make a sweep of the place in a desperate and ultimately futile attempt to clean it out. No one ever gets out from the Undercity, Arthas reassured his friend. He'll die in captivity. Too good for him, Varian said. True Lion should have killed him when he had the chance. Varian's words were prophetic. The great orcish leader had only appeared to be humbled by the scorn and hatred heaped upon him. It turned out he was far from broken. Lured by his dispiritedness, or so Arthas gleaned by the eavesdropping, the guards had grown lax in their care of him. No one was quite sure how Orgrim Doomhammer's escape had been engineered, because no one survived to report it. Every guard he encountered had gotten his neck broken. But there was a trail of bodies, that of guards, indigents, and criminals. Doomhammer did not discriminate. Leading from the wide open cell through the Undercity to the single escape route, the foul-smelling sewers, Doomhammer was captured again shortly thereafter, and this time placed in the internment camps. When he escaped from there too, the Alliance collectively held its breath, waiting for a renewed attack. None came. Either Doomhammer was finally dead, or they had shattered his fighting spirit after all. 2 years had come and gone, and now it looked like the dark portal through which the Horde had entered Azeroth the first time. The portal that the Alliance had shut down at the end of the Second War was going to be reopened. Or had already been reopened. Arthas wasn't sure which, because nobody apparently seemed to want to bother to tell him anything, even though he was going to become king someday. It was a beautiful day, sunny and clear and warm. Part of him wanted to be outside with his new horse, whom he had named Invincible, the same foal he had seen being born on that bitter winter day 2 years ago. Maybe he'd do that later. But for now, his footsteps took him to the armory, where he and Varian had sparred, and Varian had embarrassed him. The slight was unintended, to be sure, but it stung all the same. 2 years. Arthas walked over to the rack of wooden training swords and took one down. At 11, he had what his governess called a growth spurt. At least she'd called it that the last time he had seen her, when she wept and hugged him and declared him a proper young man now, and no longer in need of a governess. The little sword he had trained with at 9 was a child's sword. He was indeed a proper young man, standing at 5'8" and likely to grow even taller, if his heritage was any indication. He hefted the sword, swinging it this way and that, and suddenly grinned. He advanced on one of the old suits of armor, gripping the sword firmly. "Hoy!" he called, wishing it was one of the disgusting green monsters that had been such a thorn in his father's side for so long. He drew himself up to his full height and lifted the tip of the sword to the suit of armor's throat. "Think you to pass here, vile orc? You are in Alliance lands. I will show you mercy this once. Be gone and never return." But orcs didn't understand surrender or honor. They were just brutes, so it would refuse to kneel and show him respect. "What? You will not depart? I have given you a chance. Now we fight." And he lunged, as he had seen Varian do, not directly at the armor, no. The thing was very old and very valuable, but right beside it. Strike, block, duck in under the swing, bring the sword all the way across the body, then whirl, and he gasped as the sword seemed to take a life of its own and flew across the room. It landed loudly on the marble floor, sliding along with a grating sound before slowly spinning to a stop. Damn it. He looked toward the door and right into the face of Muradin Bronzebeard. Uridin was the dwarven ambassador to Lord Aeron, brother to King Magni Bronzebeard, and a great favorite at court for his jovial, no-nonsense approach to everything, from fine ale and pastries to matters of the state. He had a reputation as an excellent warrior as well, cunning and fierce in battle. And he had just watched the future king of Lordaeron pretend to fight orcs and throw his sword clear across the room. Arthas felt his whole body break out in a sweat, and he knew his cheeks were pink. He tried to recover. Ambassador, I was just... The dwarf coughed and looked away. I'm looking for your father, boy. Can you direct me? This infernal place has too many turns. Arthas mutely pointed to a stairway on his left. He watched the dwarf go. No other words were exchanged. Arthas had never been more embarrassed in his life. He watched the dwarf go. Tears of shame burned in his eyes, and he blinked them back hard. Without even bothering to put away the wooden sword, he fled the room. 10 minutes later, he was free, riding out of the stables and heading east into the hills of Terrasfall Glades. He had 2 horses with him, a gentle, elderly, dapple-gray gelding called Trueheart, upon which he was mounted, and, on a training lead, the 2-year-old, the colt, Invincible. He'd felt the bond between them from the moment they had locked eyes, moments after the foal's birth. Arthas had known then that this would be his steed, his friend, the great horse with a great heart, who would be as much a part of him as, no more than, his armor or weapons. Horses from good stock such as this one could live 20 years or more if cared for well. This was the mount who would bear Arthas elegantly in ceremony and faithfully on daily rides. He was not a war horse. Such were a breed apart, used only for specific purposes at specific times. He'd have one when he went into battle, but Invincible would, and indeed already had, become a part of his life. The stallion's coat, mane, and tail, gray at his birth, had turned white as the snow that had coated the ground on the day. It was a color that was so rare even among the Balnir-bred horses, whose white coats were really mostly just like gray. Arthas had toyed with names like Snowfall or Starlight, but in the end, he followed the informal tradition of Lord Aeron Knights and gave his steed the name of Equality. Uther's mount was steadfast, Tarina's courageous. His was invincible. Arthas wanted desperately to ride Invincible, but the horse master warned that 2 years old was at least a year too young. "Two's a baby," he'd say. "They're still growing, their bones still forming. Be patient, Your Highness." Another year isn't that long to wait for a horse that'll serve you well for 2 decades. But it was a long time to wait. Too long. Arthas glanced back over his shoulder at the horse, growing impatient with the plodding canter that seemed the most that true heart could summon. In contrast with the elderly gelding, the 2-year-old moved almost as if floating, with hardly any effort. His ears were pricked forward, and his nostrils flared as he scented the smells of the glade. His eyes were bright, and he seemed to be saying, "Come on, Arthas. This is what I was born for." Surely one ride couldn't hurt him. Just a canter, and then back to the stables, as if nothing had happened. He slowed True Heart to a walk and tied the reins to a low-slung tree branch. Invincible whickered as Arthas walked up to him. The prince grinned at the velvety softness of the muzzle brushing his palm as he fed the horse a piece of apple. Invincible was used to having a saddle. It was part of the slow and patient breaking process to get the horse accustomed to having something on its back. But an empty saddle was much different from a living being. Still, he'd spend a lot of time with the animal. Arthas said a short prayer, and then quickly, before Invincible could sidestep out of the way, vaulted onto the horse's back. Invincible reared, neighing furiously. Arthas wrapped his hands in the wiry mane and clung like a burr with every inch of his long legs. The horse hopped and bucked, but Arthas held on. He yelped as Invincible tried to scrape him off by running beneath one of the branches, but he did not let go. And then Invincible was galloping, or rather, he was flying, or at least so it seemed to the giddy young prince who crouched low on the horse's neck and grinned wildly. He'd never been on an animal this fast before, and his heart pounded with excitement. He didn't even try to control Invincible. It was all he could do to simply hang on. It was glorious, wild, beautiful, everything he'd dreamed of. They would, before he even realized what had happened, Arthas was hurtling through the air to land hard on the grassy earth. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe from the impact. Slowly, he got to his feet. His body ached, but nothing was broken. But Invincible was rapidly disappearing dot in the distance. Arthas swore violently, kicking a hillock and balling his fists. He was in for it now. Sir Uther, the Lightbringer, was waiting for him upon his return. Arthas grimaced as he slid off True Heart and handed the reins to the groomsmen. Invincible came back a short time ago by himself. He had a nasty cut on his leg, but I'm sure you'll be glad to know that the horsemaster says he'll be fine. Arthas debated lying, telling Uther he'd been spooked and Invincible had fled. But it was obvious from the grass stains on his clothes that he'd fallen, and Uther would never believe that the prince couldn't stay on gentle old Trueheart, spooked or not. You know you were not supposed to ride him yet, Uther continued. Arthas sighed. I know. Arthas, do you not understand? If you put too much pressure on him at this age, I get it, all right? I could cripple him. It was just the one time. And that's all it will be, isn't it? Yes, sir, Arthas said sullenly. You missed your lessons. Again. Arthas was silent and did not look up at Uther. He was angry, embarrassed, and hurting, and wanted nothing more than a hot bath and some briarthorn tea to ease the pain. His right knee was starting to swell. At least you are in time for the prayer session this afternoon. Uther eyed him up and down, though you'll need to wash up. Arthas was indeed sweaty and knew he smelled like horse. It was a good smell, he thought, an honest one. Hurry up. We'll be assembling in the chapel. Arthas wasn't even sure what the prayer session was focusing on today. He felt vaguely bad about that. The light was important to both his father and Uther, and he knew that they badly wanted him to be as devout as they were. But while he couldn't argue with the evidence of his own eyes, the light was almost definitely real. He'd seen priests and the new order of the paladins work miracles with healing and protection. He'd never felt called to sit and meditate for hours as Uther did, or make frequent references in reverent tones as his father did. It was just there. An hour later, scrubbed and changed into an outfit that was simple yet elegant, Arthas hurried to the small family chapel in the royal wing. It was not a large room, but it was beautiful. It was a miniature version of the traditional chapel style that could be seen in every human town. Perhaps a trifle more lavish with regard to the details. The chalice that was shared was finely wrought of gold and inlaid with gems. The table upon which it lay, an antique. Even the benches had comforting padding, while the common folk had to make do with flat wooden ones. He realized, as he entered quietly, that he was the last, and winced as he recalled that several important personages were visiting his father. In addition to the regular attendees, his family, Uther and Muradin, King Trollbane was present, though he looked even less happy than Arthas to be there. And someone else. A girl, slender and straight, with long blonde hair, her back turned to him. Arthas peered at her, curious, and bumped into one of his benches. He might as well dropped a plate. Queen Leanna, still a beauty in her early 50s, turned at the sound, smiling affectionately at her son. Her gown was perfectly arranged, her hair pulled back in a golden coif from which no unruly tendril escaped. Kalia, 14, and looking as gawky and coltish as Invincible had been at his birth, shot him a scowl. Evidently, word of his misdeeds had gotten out, or else she was just angry with him at being late. Tyrannus nodded at him, then returned his eyes to the bishop giving the service. Arthas cringed inwardly at the quiet disapproval in the gaze. Trollbane paid him no mind, and Muradin, too, did not turn. Arthas slouched down onto one of the benches again, against the wall. The bishop began to speak and lift his hands, limned with a soft white radiance. Arthas wished the girl would turn a little so he could catch a glimpse of her face. Who was she? Obviously the daughter of a noble or someone else of high rank, else she would not be invited to attend private family services. He thought about who she might be, more interested in discovering her identity than the words of the service. And His Royal Highness Arthas Minithil, intoned the bishop. Arthas jerked to attention, wondering if he'd missed something important. May the light's blessing be upon him in every thought, word, and deed, so that he may thrive beneath it and grow to serve it as a paladin. Arthas felt a sudden calming warmth flow through him as his blessing was laid upon him. The stiffness and soreness vanished, leaving him refreshed and at peace. The bishop turned to the queen and the princess. May the light shine on her royal majesty, Liane Minithil, that she... Arthas grinned and waited for the bishop to complete the individual blessings. He'd named the girl then. Arthas leaned against the back room of the wall. And we humbly request the light's blessing on Lady Jaina Proudmoore. May she be blessed with his healing and the wisdom that she... The mystery girl was a mystery no longer. Jaina Proudmoore, a year younger than he, daughter to Admiral Dalen Proudmoore, naval war hero and ruler of Kaltaras. What did intrigue him was why she was here, and that her studies at Dalaran go well. We ask that she become a representative of the light, and that in the role of a mage, she will serve her people well and truly. That made sense. She was on her way to Dalaran, the beautiful city of Magi, not far from the capital city. Knowing the rigid rules of etiquette and hospitality, they were so pervasive in royal noble circles, she'd be here for a few days before traveling on. This, he thought, could be fun. At the end of the service, Arthas, already located near the door, stepped out first. Muradin and Trollbane were the first out, both looking slightly relieved that the service was over. Tyrannus, Uther, Liane, Callie, and Jaina followed. Both his sister and the Proudmoore girl were fair-haired and slender, but the resemblance stopped there. Callie was a delicate-boned, with a face right out of gold paintings, pale-skinned and soft. Jaina, however, had bright eyes and a lively smile. She moved like someone who was well accustomed to riding and hiking. She obviously spent a great deal of time outdoors, and her face was tanned with a smattering of sprinkles across her nose. This, Arthas decided, was a girl who would not mind getting in a snowball fight or going for a swim on a hot day. Someone unlike his sister he could play with. Arthas, a word with ye, came a gruff voice. Arthas turned to see the ambassador peering at him. Of course, sir, Arthas said, his heart sinking. All he wanted to do was talk to his new friend. He was already sure they were going to get along famously. And Muradin probably wanted to scold him again for the embarrassing display earlier in the armory. At least the dwarf was discreet enough to walk a few paces away. He turned to face the prince, stubby thumbs hooked into his belt, gruff face nodded in thought. Lad, he said, I'll get right to the point. Your fighting form is terrible. One sec, I'm gonna have to drink. I need all the honey tea. Lots and lots of honey tea. Are you enjoying this, chick? I hope so. I know Roko is. Alright. Let's continue. Again, Arthas felt the blood rush to his face. I know, he said, but father, your father has many things on his mind. Dinna you be saying a thing against him? Well, what was he supposed to say? Well, I can't very well teach myself fighting. You saw what happened when I tried. Akintha, I'll teach ya if you like. You will? Arthas was at first disbelieving, then delighted. The dwarves were renowned for their fighting prowess, among many things. Part of Arthas wondered if Muradin would also teach him how to hold his ale, another thing dwarves were known for. But he decided not to ask that. Aye, that's what I said, wasn't it? I've spoken with your father, and he's all for it. Been put off a long time enough as it is. But let's get one thing straight. I'll take nae excuses, and I'll be pushing you right hard. And if any moment I say, "Tay missile, Muradin, you're wasting your time," I stop. D'ye agree, boy? Arthas fought back an incordious giggle at the thought of someone who stood so much shorter than him calling him a boy, but he bit it back. Yes, sir, he said fervently. Muradin nodded and sucked out a large, calloused hand. Arthas shook it, grinning. He glanced up at his father, who was deep in conversation with Uther. They turned as one to regard him, both pairs of eyes narrowing in speculation, and inwardly Arthas sighed. He knew that look. so much for playing with Jaina. He'd probably not have time to even see her again before she left. He turned to watch as Kalia, her arm around the younger girl's shoulder, swept Jaina from the room. But right before she disappeared through the doorway, Admiral Proudmoore's daughter turned her golden head, caught Arthas's gaze with her own, and smiled. End of chapter 2. Yay! We got through it. What do you guys think? Is this something that you would like to have, I don't know, weekly, perhaps? I'm really digging the story. And Roko, I know I called it with Jaina in my head too, as soon as the description. I was like, oh, that's Jaina. It is a good book. I actually have never read it, so it's my first time too. In case anyone else hasn't read it. We're studying WoW lore, and we're grinding tomorrow. Yes! 300 IQ strat. Great. I know, that's what this is all about, Nitro. It's like all to boost us. Well, unintentionally planned that way, I suppose. Is it gonna be okay, Roko? We're gonna be moral support, okay? All of us, we're gonna have, like, each other's backs, and we'll help each other gear. We'll send stuff to one another. It's gonna be okay. We'll definitely have to get some sleep, because we can't, like, give ourselves heart attacks because we're grinding. But we do have to no life it. I'm just telling you now. No sleep. No weakness. Only grind. Ooh, a druid Nitro. I'm gonna go hunter again. I'm gonna do a hunter, orc hunter. I'm gonna try out that rested XP thing because I kind of need all the help I can get to make sure I go quick. We should aim to be 60, I think. Like 5 days max. 3 to 4 days would be best, but I feel like 4 to 5 days is more realistic. What do you guys think? My voice is good for the planning. That's perfect. I'm going to help us plan, okay? Yay, Roko. That's awesome to hear. This is like probably like intro to ASMR. Because I'm not doing any sounds, like no nail clacking or like tapping wood or crinkly sounds. It's just me quietly reading. So we're gonna have the angel and succubus voice. Thank you, Nitro. I take that as a compliment. Thank you, thank you. So we'll have a warrior, a druid. Maybe I should go priest. Your ears are blessed. I'm gonna use that next time I do an ASMRC. It's just gonna be ears are blessed. Oh, that probably was pretty loud. I don't know. I could go priest. I actually don't mind going priest. Because then we would have 2 people that could potentially heal or DPS. The warrior that can tank. And Robo said he's also gonna roll. Do you remember what he said he was gonna be? I don't remember if he did say. He might, did he say hunter? I think he said he was going to be hunter, actually. He knows hunter best. Yeah, the raid items are bad, which is good. Very good. I think that's an excellent rule. And that would be pretty shitty if we like got to 60 and did like everything in our power. Yeah, I think it's gonna take longer than 5 days. I don't know. I have a feeling it's gonna, so I think that it's gonna be like a long push. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think, even if I go no life, I still don't think I can get to 60 in under 5 days. I just don't. Okay, so you said pots and elixirs are going to be a huge drama? What do you mean? I think that, so you can't use the mind controller from engineering, but that's like whatever. I don't know why you would want to use that in a duel anyways. But as far as like potions and pots and everything else, that's a go, isn't it? I mean, anything else you can make, you can use. Anything you find, anything you get through questing or dungeons, you can use. Really? You can use the infinite pot? HP, I mean? Infinite pot. Now I'm going back to my BDO days. Yeah, some of them could. Are you allowed to be buffed by other classes? Like, how does that work, I wonder? Are they gonna say, like, if you're not a priest, you can't have the fort buff? You know, that kind of thing? Class buffs are allowed, but no world buffs. Oh. How does that work? What if you're like, I have no friends? I have no friends. Can you please give me your buffs? Give me Mark of the Wild, and you're like, all the druids are like, no. Just no. And you don't get Mark of the Wild because you don't know anybody. Yes, just begging for all the class buffs. Yeah, the locks are just gonna eat those buffs right up. Oh, I forgot about that. That's such a bitch thing. That's like the worst thing about fighting a warlock. Okay, that's just solidified my decision to remain hunter. Sorry. Because at least with hunter I can not have to worry about buffs so much being eaten, as I can just poison and slow them and let my pet eat you while I hide behind a tree. That's gonna be my tactic. I'm just gonna hide. If only I could shadow meld. Why won't they let me be a night elf? Alright, well, I really hope you all enjoyed this stream. All I can do is hope that I'm a better hunter than any of the other hunters that people fight. That's really all I can do. I think I know hunter the best. And also, probably is my best chat, that or shadow priest. Shadow priest or hunter. Actually, my throat feels a little dry, but not bad. I'm just gonna go drink some tea. And then I might even do another stream, but not ASMR. It might just be like a WoW party, like pre-event. If I do another stream, it won't be until probably 9 p.m. MST. That might be too late. So we'll see. Maybe I'll just pop in Discord. Maybe we can all just be in Discord and be like normal people and play some WoW. You're welcome, Lament. It was hard not to sleep. Oh, Nitro, that's perfect though. Because that's what my whole goal is, to make it like so comfy and make you so sleepy and so relaxed that you can like hardly resist. Your eyes get so heavy. Just like on the verge of sleepiness. Yes, Roko, exactly. We would have to do that. So maybe we should practice now. I mean, you all know what I sound like. So it's only fair that now, if we're going to do this event, that I get to hear what you sound like too. Okay? Okay. Thank you for agreeing with me. I know you did. So I'm just going to pretend like you did and assume you did. Alright, I'm going to end the stream now. Use it for sleeping. I'll do like chapter 3 and we'll do more. Maybe I can do like 2 chapters a week. As if, oh, guess what? Before I go. So I was trying out work yesterday just for shits and giggles to be like, how much do I even know the horde leveling? And I got invited to a guild on Skull Rock. And when I entered, they were talking about the tank was in Black Fathom Debts. Guess what he did? Take a wild guess what the tank did in BFD. He tapped all the candles at once. All of them. And wiped 4 of the people in the party, including himself. Guess who survived? The hunter. The hunter survived because the hunter saw, I guess the other people didn't see, but the hunter saw, and the hunter was in the guild as well as the tank. The hunter saw him tap all 4 candles and ran. As soon as he saw it, he's like, I'm out of here. And he called it out in party chat. But the other people, I guess, maybe didn't believe him or didn't know if he actually had hit all 4 candles. So they stayed and they died. I can't believe a tank would not know to not touch the candles. Like, you don't even do that in regular vanilla. And this is hardcore. You don't do that. Okay. Alright. Enough ranting about that, though. It was pretty funny, I thought. Okay. Goodbye, my lovelies. Have fun. I will maybe see you later tonight if you're around. Sweet dreams once you get there. Bye.